Hi folks, and welcome to the fourth in a series of videos on Salient Processes Salesforce Toolkit for BPM. In this edition, we're going to talk about the notion of Salesforce informing BPM when work needs to be done. So the notion here is that we might have BPM processes that need to be triggered or otherwise activated when something happens in the Salesforce environment. For example, if a customer places a new order, or we have a new customer on board, or any number of a variety of things that might happen outside of the BPM environment inside of Salesforce. So what we want to happen is when something changes in Salesforce, we want BPM to become cognizant of that happening. Now I'm going to tell you two distinct stories here. They are functionally identical. That means that you'll end up at the same place with both of them, but the implementations are different, and we'll get to why they're different and the choices between them. The first one I'm going to call out is the BPM Notion of Polling. So in this story, BPM will periodically poll Salesforce and ask Salesforce, or make a request of Salesforce, what has changed since the last time I polled you. At which point BPM will receive a response, and that may be nothing has changed, or it may be the set of records that have changed and how they've changed. So as BPM continually polls Salesforce, what will happen is BPM will become cognizant of the things that have changed inside Salesforce. So with that notion, let's now look at how we can engage this. So what we do is we start by creating ourselves a service. So it's a BPM service. And this service has as input one of the Salesforce predefined business objects. So it receives as input a list of inbound events. And each inbound event describes what kind of event was it. Is it a creation, a deletion, an update? What kind of Salesforce object was it that was changed? What's the ID of that record, and a copy of the record itself. So this is a list of objects in Salesforce that have somehow changed. So when we write this service, it now becomes completely up to us what we in BPM land want to do when we become cognizant of changes in Salesforce. This could, for example, fire a BPM event, also known as a UCA. This could fire a BPM event. This could update local data in BPM. This could start a process. This could fire a service. This could create a human task. All the BPM aspects of the story are wide open to us. So the bottom line is, when we define a service, we can configure that service such that when something changes in Salesforce, we can become cognizant of it inside BPM. So obviously, having just written a service, we need to somehow tell Salesforce and BPM that we want this service to be triggered when that happens. Now the way we do that is in the after installation of the Salesforce Toolkit, we get a new service in our dashboards here, and this service is called Manage Inbound Events. And in the Manage Inbound Events, we can create what are called subscriptions, and these subscriptions map what events we're looking for from Salesforce, and we've got two choices there: an updated Salesforce record, or a created Salesforce record, or a deletion. We can specify what kinds of objects we're interested in. For example, this is the account Salesforce object, and we can specify the service handler which is going to be invoked when one of these events arrives. So by specifying this subscription, we've now told BPM that when one of these event types from Salesforce occurs, now go ahead and invoke this service handler which we just wrote, my event handler, and that will then cause the execution of this. But since we're talking about polling here, we can then define the frequency with which we wish to poll the Salesforce environment. So we can add polling requests to the BPM environment, and every interval period of time, BPM will then poll Salesforce, look for changed objects, and then invoke whichever subscription handlers apply based upon those entries. All right, so let's see this in action. So what we'll do is we'll bring up our Salesforce console, and here's Salesforce, and now I'm going to create a new account. Am I? Yes, I am. I'm going to create a new account, and we will call this the XYZ company. I hit the save button, and now we've created a new account. Now I'm going to switch over to my console for my BPM environment, and we're going to wait. All right, and we waited for up to 2 minutes there. Wasn't 2 minutes, and we get an event arriving in our console, which basically says we saw an event details, and here's the details of the event as received from Salesforce. And what we're seeing here is the object type, the record ID, and the other information which matches what we asked it to log in our log event. So if we look at the log event, we see that we asked it to log these details. So this is the details of the incoming Salesforce event having been received from Salesforce. And that was our concept of polling. Now let's look at the second technique that's available to us. This technique we call pushing. So the notion here is that instead of BPM polling the Salesforce environment, what we're going to have is we're going to have Salesforce push to us changes that it detects. So Salesforce, when it recognizes that something has changed within it, has the ability to call outbound over the internet some external application. And as part of the Salesforce Toolkit that Salient Process provides, we've provided this gateway component which you can expose through onto the internet. It's secure, it's distinct from the BPM environment, and it will receive the Salesforce pushes, and when it receives those, it will relay those on to BPM in a secure fashion, and BPM will see those as arriving events. So the distinction, of course, is that between this and the pool BPM is polling, and here Salesforce is pushing. Now the advantage of Salesforce pushing is, of course, that there will be no latency between something detected in Salesforce, a change being detected in Salesforce, and that being pushed down to BPM. In the polling mechanism, you've got latency because you're polling periodically. You're not polling constantly every few milliseconds. You're probably polling every few minutes at most to see what's changed. Now, while that may go, well, I'll always use Salesforce Push then, the downside, of course, is that you have to expose some technology onto the internet, which Salesforce will then push to you. Whereas with the BPM polling mechanism, you have no exposure whatsoever because you are making client calls to Salesforce. With the push mechanism, we have to configure Salesforce so that it knows where to send records and, of course, which records to send. So Salesforce has a very nice mechanism that allows us to define these. So within the Salesforce dashboards, we can define rules which are executed when data changes, and we can choose to activate or deactivate those. Now, while I was polling, I had my server push in Salesforce deactivated. So let me go ahead and activate the server push in Salesforce. And now let me come over to the Salesforce environment, and then what we will do is we will create ourselves a new object in Salesforce like this, I'll create a new object and we will call this ABC123 and hit the save button. That's created a new Salesforce object, and now if we switch over to the BPM log, immediately we see that our service was invoked because we were pushed from Salesforce. So a different technique, two techniques in fact, one known as Salesforce Pull or Polling, and the other known as Salesforce Push. So in summary, what we showed here was another feature of the Salient Process Toolkit. The ability for BPM to be signaled, evented, notified if you like, when data changes within the Salesforce environment. To that end, we provide two distinct implementations of this technology. One is known as polling, where BPM polls Salesforce looking for changes, and if a change is detected, an event handler is invoked. And the other is Salesforce Push, where, once again, when data changes in Salesforce, Salesforce becomes cognizant of that, and we have configured Salesforce to push those changes down to BPM for execution and notification. Alright, my friends, I hope you found these set of videos useful to you. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to call us, contact us here at Salient Process, and we will be talking with you soon. Thanks now, guys. Bye for now.